The blood dripped from Nora Davis's split lip as her father's hand connected with her face again, the force of it sending her stumbling backward against the kitchen table. The year was 1879, and in Wickenburg, Arizona, a woman's voice was meant to be soft and yielding, not sharp and defiant as hers had been only moments before. "You'll keep your mouth shut when I'm speaking, girl," Josiah Davis growled, his thick fingers curling into a fist once more. 18 years old and still haven't learned your place. Nora tasted copper in her mouth but kept her gaze steady. "The land isn't yours to sell, Father. Mother wanted it kept in the family. You know that." Her words earned her another blow, this one catching her across the cheekbone. The pain blossomed hot and immediate, and she knew it would leave a mark that would last for days. It wasn't the first time, and in the Davis household, it certainly wouldn't be the last. "Your mother is dead," Josiah spat, his voice slurring from the whiskey he'd been drinking since noon. "And everything under this roof belongs to me, including you." Outside the modest clapboard house, the Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Wickenburg. It was a growing town, prosperous from the mines that dotted the nearby hills, but prosperity hadn't brought peace to the Davis home. Not since Sarah Davis had died 3 years prior, leaving Nora alone with a father whose grief had twisted into something cruel and unyielding. "Now clean yourself up," Josiah muttered, turning away to reach for the whiskey bottle on the sideboard. "Judge Patterson and his wife are coming for dinner, and I won't have you embarrassing me." Nora touched her fingertips to her cheek, feeling the warmth of the rising bruise. Judge Patterson, her father's ally in the matter of selling off the western parcel of their land that had belonged to her mother's family for 2 generations. Land that, according to her mother's wishes, was meant to go to Nora upon her marriage. But Josiah Davis had other plans, and in Wickenburg, a man's word was law, especially in his own home. "Yes, Father," she said quietly, knowing that further argument would only lead to more bruises to explain away. As she retreated up the narrow staircase to her bedroom, Nora's mind was already working. She had learned over the years that direct confrontation never worked with her father, but that didn't mean she had given up. Her mother had taught her better than that. In her room, Nora poured water from the pitcher into the basin and carefully washed her face, wincing as the cool water stung her cut lip. The mirror above her dresser revealed what she already knew: a darkening bruise along her right cheekbone, a swollen lip, and eyes that burned with a determination her father had never managed to beat out of her. "Just a few more months," she whispered to her reflection. Her plan was simple, but required patience. Her cousin Emily had written from San Francisco, offering Nora a place to stay if she could make the journey west. The stagecoach fare was steep, but Nora had been secretly saving from the money she earned selling embroidered handkerchiefs to the ladies in town. Freedom was within reach. She just needed to hold on a little longer. The dinner that evening was an exercise in restraint. Nora served the meal with downcast eyes, the bruise on her face artfully concealed with powder borrowed from Mrs. Holloway next door. If Judge Patterson or his wife noticed anything amiss, they made no mention of it. In Wickenburg, as in many frontier towns, what happened within a family's 4 walls was considered their private business. "The western parcel has excellent access to water," Josiah was saying, his manner suddenly polished and businesslike, the cruel father of hours before replaced by the respected merchant and landowner. "The mining company's offer is more than fair." Judge Patterson nodded thoughtfully, his fork poised over a piece of roast beef. "The town could certainly use the expansion. More jobs mean more growth. And more people using your bank, Samuel," added Mrs. Patterson with a tight smile. Nora placed a platter of potatoes on the table, her sleeve riding up slightly as she stretched across. She quickly pulled it down, but not before Mrs. Patterson's sharp eyes caught sight of the older bruises that circled her wrist like a bracelet. The older woman's gaze flickered up to Nora's face, a brief moment of silent communication passing between them. But then she looked away, reaching for her wine glass with a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly. Another witness. Another silent bystander. More wine, Judge Patterson. Nora asked softly. The judge nodded absently, already deep in discussion with her father about property lines and mineral rights. Nora poured the wine, her mind drifting to the tin box hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom, where her meager savings lay alongside her mother's silver locket. Just a few more dollars, and she would have enough. 2 days later, Nora walked down Wickenburg's Main Street, a basket over her arm filled with goods from the general store. The early October air had a hint of crispness to it, a welcome relief from the punishing summer heat. She moved with purpose, intent on completing her errands before her father returned from a business meeting in Phoenix. "Morning, Miss Davis," called Mr. Jenkins from outside his barber shop. "Fine day, isn't it?" Nora smiled and nodded, careful to keep the still tender side of her face angled away. The bruise had deepened to a purple yellow, and no amount of powder could fully conceal it. She was nearly to the dressmaker's shop when she heard the commotion, the thunder of hooves, and the sudden shouts of men trying to control frightened horses. Turning, she saw a team of 4 horses pulling a stagecoach at dangerous speed down the main street, the driver struggling with the reins as the coach swayed precariously. People scattered to get out of the way, pressing against storefronts or ducking into alleys. Nora backed up against the wall of the dressmaker's, clutching her basket tightly as the stagecoach barreled past, the wheels hitting a deep rut in the road. The entire coach tilted dangerously, threatening to overturn. Then, seemingly from nowhere, a mounted rider appeared, racing alongside the runaway team. The man leaned from his saddle, reaching for the lead horse's bridle. For a terrifying moment, it seemed certain he would be crushed between the stagecoach and the buildings lining the street. But with remarkable skill, he managed to gain control of the lead horse, gradually slowing the panicked team until they came to a snorting, stamping halt just yards from where Nora stood. The street erupted in relieved cheers as passengers began to emerge shakily from the coach. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, checking the harness and speaking in low, calming tones to the still nervous horses. Nora found herself moving closer, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in the practical garb of a cattleman, dusty denims, a blue work shirt open at the collar, and a well-worn hat pulled low over his eyes. As he turned, she caught a glimpse of his face, sun-bronzed skin, a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard, and eyes the color of a summer storm. "That was quite something," she said before she could stop herself. The man looked up, seeming to notice her for the first time. His eyes widened slightly as they took in her face, lingering for a moment on the bruise she'd failed to completely conceal. "Just did what needed doing, madam," he replied, his voice carrying the slight drawl of Texas. "You saved lives today," Nora persisted, not quite ready to end the conversation. There was something compelling about him, a quiet confidence that drew her in. Not many men could have stopped a runaway team like that. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Spent most of my life around horses. They don't mean harm, just get scared sometimes." "Maddox," the stagecoach driver called, having climbed down from his perch. "Damn fine riding, son. Don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." The man Maddox nodded in acknowledgement but kept his eyes on Nora. "Miss?" he asked softly. "Davis," she supplied. "Nora Davis, Miss Davis." He touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "Matthew Keller, folks call me Maddox. Are you new to Wickenburg, Mr. Keller?" She shifted her basket to her other arm, ignoring the voice in her head that warned about speaking so freely to a stranger. Her father would be livid if he knew. "Just passing through," he replied. "Got some business with the cattle buyer, then heading back north to the ranch I foreman for." A commotion near the stagecoach drew his attention as the passengers gathered their scattered belongings. "Excuse me, Miss Davis. Seems like there's still some helping to be done." Nora nodded, stepping back. "Of course." As he walked away, she found herself watching him, noting the easy confidence in his stride, the way others naturally deferred to him despite him being a stranger in town. There was something about Matthew Keller that spoke of open spaces and freedom, things Nora had dreamed of for so long. That evening, as she prepared dinner, Nora couldn't keep her thoughts from returning to the incident in town. She was slicing bread when her father entered the kitchen, earlier than expected and already in a foul mood. "Patterson says the mining company's having second thoughts about the price," he growled, yanking off his hat and tossing it onto the table. "Damn vultures want to renegotiate." Nora kept her eyes on her task, saying nothing. Experience had taught her that her father's business troubles often led to her bearing the brunt of his frustration. "Got nothing to say about that," Josiah snapped, pouring himself a generous measure of whiskey. "You've had plenty to say about the sale before." "It's your decision, father," she replied carefully, placing the sliced bread on a plate. Josiah studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "Heard there was some excitement in town today. Runaway stagecoach." Nora's hand stilled momentarily before resuming their work. "Yes. No one was hurt, thankfully. Also heard you were talking with some cowboy, a stranger." There was a dangerous edge to his voice now. Nora turned, meeting her father's gaze. "He stopped the runaway horses. I merely thanked him, as did everyone else. Don't play me for a fool, girl." Josiah moved closer, the smell of whiskey heavy on his breath. "Jenkins says you were mighty friendly with this drifter." "Mr. Jenkins is mistaken," Nora replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "It was a brief conversation, nothing more." Her father's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist hard enough to bruise. "You listen to me. You're not to speak to strange men, especially not some saddle tramp passing through. You understand me?" The pain in her wrist flared as he tightened his grip, but Nora refused to show it. "Yes, father." "Your reputation reflects on me," Josiah continued, his voice low and threatening. "And I won't have people thinking I raised a loose woman." The unfairness of the accusation stung more than any physical blow could have. "No one thinks that, father. I've given them no reason to." Something in her tone must have suggested defiance because Josiah's face darkened. "You questioning me again, girl?" Before she could answer, the back of his hand connected with her cheek, the same one that had barely begun to heal. The force of it sent her stumbling against the kitchen counter, pain exploding across her face. "I said, are you questioning me?" he repeated, advancing on her. "No, father," Nora managed, tasting blood in her mouth once more. But Josiah was beyond reason now, the whiskey and his frustration over the land deal fueling his rage. His fist caught her shoulder, then her ribs, each blow accompanied by accusations and threats. Nora tried to protect herself, arms raised defensively, but it only seemed to enrage him further. "Worthless, just like your mother," he spat, grabbing her arm and twisting it painfully. "Think you're so smart, but you're nothing without me. Nothing." When it was finally over, Nora lay curled on the kitchen floor, her body throbbing with pain, listening to her father's heavy footsteps as he left the house, no doubt heading for the saloon to continue drinking. Slowly, painfully, she pulled herself up, using the table for support. In the small mirror hanging by the back door, she assessed the damage worse than usual. Her left eye was already swelling shut, her lips split in two places, and angry red marks circled her throat where he'd grabbed her. Her ribs ached when she breathed, suggesting at least one might be cracked. Tears burned in her eyes, but Nora refused to let them fall. Crying wouldn't change anything. Action would. Moving carefully, she went to her room and pried up the loose floorboard, retrieving the tin box. She counted her savings again, still not enough for San Francisco, but perhaps enough to get her to Phoenix. From there, she could find work, save more, eventually make it to California. She couldn't stay, not after tonight. Something had changed either in her father or in herself. The next time might be the last time. With trembling hands, she began to pack a small carpet bag, a change of clothing, her mother's Bible, the silver locket, and her savings carefully wrapped in a handkerchief. The stagecoach wouldn't leave until morning, but she could spend the night at the church if necessary. Reverend Thomas had always been kind to her. Just as she was fastening the bag, she heard the front door open and close. Fear shot through her. Her father returning so soon could only mean more trouble, but the footsteps sounded different, lighter somehow. "Nora," a woman's voice called softly. "Are you home, dear?" Relief washed over her. "Mrs. Holloway from next door, the only person in town who had ever shown real concern about her situation. "Upstairs," Nora called back, her voice cracking with pain. Footsteps on the stairs, then a gasp as Mrs. Holloway appeared in the doorway. "Oh, my dear girl," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "What has he done to you?" "I'm leaving," Nora said simply, gesturing to the bag on her bed. "Tonight, I can't stay any longer." The older woman moved into the room, gently touching Nora's swollen face. "Where will you go?" "Phoenix first, then California eventually. My cousin has offered me a place to stay." Mrs. Holloway's eyes filled with tears. "Let me help you. Thomas and we've turned a blind eye too long. We should have." "There's nothing you could have done," Nora interrupted gently. "He's my father. The law is on his side." "The law, perhaps, but not what's right." Mrs. Holloway squared her shoulders. "You can't travel like this, Nora. Stay with us tonight. Thomas will take you to catch the morning stage." Nora hesitated, weighing the risk. If her father discovered she'd spent the night at the Holloways, there would be consequences for them as well. "I couldn't put you in that position." "Nonsense. It's already decided." The older woman picked up Nora's carpet bag. "Come, while your father is still at the saloon. I'll tend to those injuries, and we'll sort the rest in the morning." Too exhausted and in too much pain to argue further, Nora followed Mrs. Holloway down the stairs and out the back door, across the small yard that separated the Davis home from the Holloways' modest house. The night air was cool against her bruised skin, the stars above Wickenburg brilliant and uncaring. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow everything would change, but fate had other plans. The Holloway home was warm and welcoming, smelling of fresh bread and the lavender misses. Holloway used to send her linens. Reverend Thomas Holloway, a kindly man with a silvering beard, took one look at Nora's battered face and whispered a prayer before helping his wife gather salves and bandages. "You'll stay in the guest room tonight, Mrs. Holloway said firmly as she dabbed witch hazel on Nora's split lip. "And in the morning, Thomas will drive you to catch the stage to Phoenix." "I'm grateful," Nora managed, wincing as the older woman gently examined her ribs. "But I'm afraid for you both. If my father discovers you've helped me." Reverend Holloway's voice was uncharacteristically hard. "Let him come. I've stood silent too long, God forgive me. Your father's soul is in grave peril, and I should have confronted him years ago." "Thomas," his wife cautioned, but the Reverend shook his head. "No, Margaret. We've all failed this child. The whole town has looked away while Josiah Davis has been free to." He broke off, his hands clenching at his sides. Nora had never seen the mild-mannered Reverend so upset. "Please don't blame yourself," she said quietly. "No one could have stopped him." "Someone should have tried," Mrs. Holloway murmured, applying a cool compress to Nora's swollen eye. "Rest now, dear. You're safe here tonight." Exhausted beyond measure, Nora allowed herself to be led to the small guest room at the back of the house. The bed was soft, the sheets clean and fragrant, so different from her own room where fear had been her constant companion. As Mrs. Holloway gently tucked the quilt around her, Nora felt tears threatening again. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." "Sleep now," the older woman replied, smoothing Nora's dark hair back from her forehead. "Tomorrow will bring a new beginning." Sleep came swiftly, but it was restless, filled with dreams of running down endless dusty roads with her father's footsteps always close behind. When dawn broke, Nora woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by her surroundings before the events of the previous night came rushing back. Every movement sent pain shooting through her body, but she forced herself to rise, washing quickly at the basin Mrs. Holloway had thoughtfully left filled with fresh water. Her reflection in the small mirror was shocking, her left eye nearly swollen shut, her lip twice its normal size, dark bruises blooming across her cheekbone and jaw. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Holloway's entrance with a breakfast tray. "How are you feeling this morning, dear?" "I've been better," Nora admitted, attempting a smile that turned into a wince, the older woman's eyes filled with concern. "Perhaps we should wait a day or two before you travel." "In your condition, no," Nora interrupted firmly. "I have to leave today. If I delay, I might lose my courage. Or worse, her father might discover her whereabouts and drag her home for an even more severe punishment." Mrs. Holloway seemed about to argue, but instead nodded reluctantly. "Very well. Thomas has already gone to arrange your passage. The stage leaves at 10 o'clock. As Nora ate the simple breakfast of toast and tea, Mrs. Holloway bustled about, adding a few items to Nora's carpet bag: a jar of healing salve, some clean bandages, a small loaf of bread wrapped in a cloth. "I wish I could do more," the older woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've done more than anyone," Nora replied truthfully. "I won't forget it." The sound of a wagon outside announced Reverend Holloway's return. Mrs. Holloway helped Nora into a shawl, careful to arrange it to partially conceal her bruised face, then embraced her gently. "Write to us when you're settled," she said. "And remember, you always have a place with us if you need it." Blinking back tears, Nora nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. With her carpet bag in hand, she followed Mrs. Holloway out to where the Reverend waited with their small wagon. The journey to the stage-coach station was mercifully brief. Wickenburg was just beginning to stir, storekeepers opening their establishments, a few early risers moving about their business. Nora kept her head down, the shawl pulled forward to shield her face, afraid of being seen and word getting back to her father. At the station, Reverend Holloway helped her down from the wagon, then went to speak with the station master while Nora waited, her heart pounding with anxiety. Freedom was so close now, just a few more minutes and she would be on her way to a new life. "Tickets all arranged," the Reverend said upon returning. "Stage should be here any minute." "I don't know how to thank you," Nora began, but the Reverend waved away her words. "No thanks needed. Just be safe, child, and know that God travels with you even in the darkest times." The sound of approaching hoofbeats and the rumble of wheels announced the stagecoach's arrival. As it pulled to a stop before the station, Nora's pulse quickened. This was it, her escape, her chance at a life free from fear and pain. But as the driver jumped down and the station master moved to open the door for disembarking passengers, another sound caught her attention: the swift gallop of a horse approaching at speed from the direction of town. Reverend Holloway heard it too, his expression turning grim. "Quickly," he said, taking Nora's arm. "Let's get you aboard." Before they could move, however, the rider rounded the corner, reining his horse to an abrupt halt just yards from them. Josiah Davis, his face contorted with rage, dismounted in a fluid motion that belied his years. "So it's true," he snarled, advancing on them, stealing away like a thief in the night. Nora felt her blood turn to ice, but Reverend Holloway stepped between them, his voice calm but firm. "Go home, Josiah. You're not welcome here." "Stand aside, Reverend," Josiah growled. "This is between me and my daughter." "Not anymore," Holloway replied steadily. "I've purchased her ticket to Phoenix. She's leaving Wickenburg today, and you won't stop her." Josiah's laugh was cruel. "Won't I? She's my daughter, under my legal guardianship until she marries. If you've abetted her running away, that's a matter for the law." "The law?" The Reverend's voice rose slightly. "Would that be the same law that turns a blind eye to what you've done to this child? Look at her face, Josiah. Look at what you've done." A small crowd was beginning to gather: passengers from the stage, the station master, a few curious onlookers. Nora wanted to sink into the ground, disappear from all these watching eyes, but she forced herself to stand tall despite the pain that radiated through her body. "She's clumsy," Josiah said dismissively. "Always has been. Now stand aside." He moved to push past the Reverend, reaching for Nora's arm, but another voice cut through the tense scene. "That'll be far enough, mister." All heads turned toward the newcomer, and Nora felt a shock of recognition. Matthew Keller Maddox stood a few yards away, his stance relaxed but alert, one hand resting casually near the gun holstered at his hip. Josiah eyed him warily. "This doesn't concern you, stranger." "When a man raises his hand to a woman, it concerns any decent person in the vicinity," Maddox replied, his voice level but carrying an unmistakable edge. "She's my daughter," Josiah snapped. "I've every right." "No man has the right to do what you've done," Maddox interrupted, his gaze briefly meeting Nora's before returning to her father. His eyes darkened as they took in her battered face, far more visible now than when they'd met the day before. "Those marks tell a story, and it's not one about clumsiness." The station master cleared his throat nervously. "Stage is due to leave in 5 minutes, folks. Anyone traveling needs to board now." "She's not going anywhere," Josiah insisted, taking another step toward Nora. Maddox moved then, just a slight shift of his weight, but it was enough to make Josiah pause. "The lady's made her choice," he said quietly. "I suggest you respect it." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then Josiah's gaze swept the gathered crowd, noting the many eyes now fixed on Nora's bruised face. Something in his expression changed: a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even shame, quickly buried beneath renewed anger. "Fine," he spat. "Go. But don't come crawling back when you fail, girl. You walk out now, you're no daughter of mine." Nora felt a weight lift from her shoulders at his words. "I haven't been your daughter since the day you first raised your hand to me," she said softly. "Goodbye, father." Without waiting for his response, she turned toward the stagecoach, Reverend Holloway at her side. The driver, eager to be away from the confrontation, hurried to help with her bag. "Miss Davis," Maddox called as she placed her foot on the step of the coach. She turned, meeting those storm-gray eyes again. "Safe journey." She nodded her thanks, unable to find words for the gratitude that welled within her. This stranger had done what no one else in Wickenburg had been willing to do, stand between her and her father's rage. As she settled into her seat inside the coach, relief washed over her like a cool wave. Through the window, she could see Josiah Davis standing rigidly by his horse, his face a mask of fury. Reverend Holloway had retreated to his wagon but showed no signs of leaving until the stage departed. And Maddox remained where he'd been, watching, his presence a silent barrier between Nora and the man who had caused her so much pain. The driver called out, the whip cracked, and the team lurched forward. Nora's heart soared as the stagecoach began to roll away from the station, away from Wickenburg, away from the only life she'd ever known, freedom. At last, but as the coach rounded the bend that would take her out of sight of the station, Nora couldn't help glancing back one more time. Her father was already mounting his horse, his back rigid with anger. Reverend Holloway's wagon was turning toward town, and Maddox was watching the stagecoach, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. Something fluttered in her chest, regret, perhaps, at leaving without properly thanking him. Or something else entirely, something she couldn't quite name. But there was no time to dwell on it now. Phoenix awaited, and beyond it, a new life far from the shadow of her father's fists. The journey to Phoenix was arduous, each jolt of the stagecoach sending fresh waves of pain through Nora's battered body. Her fellow passengers, a middle-aged couple, a young miner, and an elderly woman, cast curious, sometimes sympathetic glances at her bruised face, but mercifully asked no questions. By late afternoon, the terrain had changed from the familiar rolling hills around Wickenburg to the flatter, more open landscapes surrounding Phoenix. As the stagecoach rattled into the busy streets of the territorial capital, Nora felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. She had been to Phoenix only twice before, both times with her father on business, and never alone. The stage pulled to a halt before the Desert Inn, a respectable establishment catering to travelers. Nora climbed down stiffly, wincing as her bruised ribs protested the movement. The driver handed her the carpet bag with a tip of his hat. "You all right, miss?" he asked quietly, his eyes flickering to her battered face. "Yes, thank you," she replied, summoning a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Is there a boarding house nearby that you'd recommend? Something affordable?" The driver scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Mrs. Whitman's place on Adams Street is clean and reasonable. Tell her Charlie sent you, and she might give you a weekly rate." Nora thanked him and set off, the weight of her carpet bag adding to her discomfort as she made her way through the unfamiliar streets. Phoenix was larger and busier than Wickenburg, with more permanent buildings and fewer tents and shacks. The sidewalks were crowded with a diverse mix of people, businessmen in suits, cowboys fresh off the range, Mexican laborers, and women in fashionable dresses that made Nora acutely aware of her own plain, travel-worn attire. She found Mrs. Whitman's boarding house with little difficulty, a neat two-story building with a small sign out front advertising clean rooms for respectable persons. The proprietress, a sturdy woman with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes, took one look at Nora's face and ushered her inside without comment. "Charlie from the stage line sent me," Nora explained as they entered a tidy parlor. "He said you might have a room available." Mrs. Whitman nodded briskly. "Always have time for Charlie's referrals. He doesn't send me troublemakers." Her gaze swept over Nora's bruises again, but her expression remained neutral. "Room's $3 a week, includes breakfast and dinner. No gentlemen callers, no liquor, no coming in after 10. "That's more than fair," Nora agreed, mentally calculating how long her savings would last. Not long enough to reach San Francisco, certainly, but enough to give her time to find work. "You looking for employment?" Mrs. Whitman asked, seemingly reading her thoughts. "Yes, madam. I can sew, cook, keep accounts. I've helped run my father's household since my mother passed." Something in Mrs. Whitman's eyes softened slightly. "Henderson's Dry Goods on Washington Street is hiring a shopgirl. Pays not much, but old man Henderson's decent enough. I'll mention you to him when I stop in tomorrow." "Thank you," Nora said, touched by the woman's unexpected kindness. "I'd be most grateful. Rooms at the top of the stairs, second door on the right, dinner's at 6 sharp." Mrs. Whitman handed her a key. "Rest up. You look like you could use it." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a chest of drawers, and a window overlooking the street below. After the constant fear that had permeated her existence in Wickenburg, the simple privacy of the room felt like extraordinary luxury. Nora unpacked her meager belongings, then carefully washed her face at the basin, assessing her injuries in the small mirror above it. The bruises had darkened to a vivid purple-blue, but the swelling around her eye had subsided slightly. She applied some of Mrs. Holloway's salve to her split lip and the worst of the bruises, then lay down on the bed, exhaustion overtaking her. She woke to the sound of a bell ringing downstairs, the call to dinner. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, she thought she was back in Wickenburg, that her father would be waiting at the table with his critical eye and quick temper. The realization that she was free of him, at least for now, washed over her with such intensity that tears sprang to her eyes. Dinner was a simple but hearty affair: beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie served at a long table in the dining room where Nora met her fellow boarders. There were 2 salesmen, an elderly schoolteacher, and a young widow who worked as a milliner's assistant. They were politely curious about the newcomer but, like the stage-coach passengers, refrained from commenting on her obvious injuries. Over the next few days, Nora settled into a routine. True to her word, Mrs. Whitman spoke to Mr. Henderson, and Nora found herself employed at the dry goods store, arranging merchandise, serving customers, and keeping the ledgers in order. The work was not difficult, and Mr. Henderson, though gruff, was fair and respectful. Her bruises gradually faded, and with them, some of the constant fear that had been her companion for so long. She wrote to Mrs. Holloway, thanking her again for her help and assuring her that she was safe and employed. She did not provide her address. However, the fear of her father somehow tracking her down remained too strong. A week passed, then 2. Nora began to feel more at home in Phoenix, learning its streets and customs, making cautious friendships with her fellow boarders and the other shopgirls at Henderson's. She continued to save what she could from her wages, though the journey to San Francisco now seemed less urgent. Perhaps she could build a life here in Phoenix, far enough from Wickenburg to be safe, but not so far that she felt completely untethered from all she had known. It was late one afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after her arrival in Phoenix, when the bell above the shop door jingled, announcing a customer. Nora was in the back, organizing a new shipment of fabrics, and called out, "Be right with you." When she emerged into the main shop, she stopped short, her heart giving an unexpected lurch in her chest. Matthew Keller stood just inside the doorway, hat in hand, looking somehow both out of place and entirely at ease among the bolts of fabric and household goods. His clothes were clean but trail-worn, his face freshly shaved but still tanned from hours in the sun. "Miss Davis," he said, his deep voice sending an inexplicable warmth through her. "I hoped I might find you here." For a moment, Nora couldn't speak, struck by the improbability of his presence. "Mr. Keller," she finally managed, "what brings you to Phoenix?" "Business initially," he replied, taking a few steps further into the shop. "Delivering cattle to the army depot north of town." He paused, his gray eyes studying her face, noting the nearly healed bruises, the healthier color in her cheeks. "But I had another purpose in mind when I rode into town today." "Oh," Nora tried to keep her voice casual, though her pulse had quickened. "I wanted to see for myself that you were all right." The directness of his statement, delivered without artifice or apology, was so unlike the polite evasion she was accustomed to that it momentarily took her aback. "I'm quite well, thank you," she said, gesturing to her face. "As you can see, I'm healing." Maddox nodded, his expression grave. "I'm glad to hear it. Reverend Holloway asked me to give you this if I found you." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew an envelope. He didn't know where to send it. Nora accepted the envelope, recognizing the Reverend's neat handwriting. "You've seen him recently then?" "Stopped in Wickenburg on my way south. Thought I'd check on how things stood." He hesitated, then added, "Your father's been quiet since you left." "The Reverend says he's drinking more, but hasn't caused any trouble." Relief mingled with an odd pang of something like regret in Nora's chest. Despite everything, a part of her still cared what became of her father. "Thank you for telling me." They stood in silence for a moment, the late afternoon sun slanting through the shop windows, casting golden light across the polished floorboards. Nora was acutely aware of his presence, of the quiet strength he emanated, of the way his gaze never wavered from her face. "Are you staying in Phoenix long?" she asked, breaking the silence. "A few days." His mouth curved in a slight smile. "I find myself with unexpected business here now." Before Nora could ask what he meant, the shop bell jangled again as Mr. Henderson returned from his errand. The older man glanced between them with undisguised curiosity. "Everything all right, Miss Davis?" he asked, moving behind the counter. "Yes, Mr. Henderson. This is Mr. Keller, an acquaintance from Wickenburg." Nora wasn't sure how else to describe the man who had effectively secured her freedom. Maddox extended his hand, which Henderson shook after a moment's assessment. "Just delivering a message to Miss Davis," Maddox explained, "and I should be on my way now." He turned back to Nora, replacing his hat. "Perhaps I might call on you again before I leave town, Miss Davis. There are matters I'd like to discuss further." Something in his tone made it clear this was more than a courtesy, but Nora couldn't imagine what matters he might be referring to. Curiosity won out over caution. "I'm staying at Mrs. Whitman's boarding house on Adams Street. I'm free tomorrow evening after 6. Maddox nodded, touching the brim of his hat. "Until tomorrow, then." After he'd gone, Mr. Henderson raised an eyebrow in Nora's direction. "Friend of yours, Miss Davis?" "Not exactly," she replied, still looking at the door through which Maddox had departed. "But perhaps the closest thing to a friend I had in Wickenburg." That evening, in the privacy of her room, Nora opened the letter from Reverend Holloway. It was brief but warm, expressing his and Mrs. Holloway's hope that she was well and finding her way in Phoenix. The most interesting part came toward the end. "Your friend Mr. Keller made quite an impression in Wickenburg after your departure. He made inquiries about your father and the situation at your home that led many in town to reflect on their own silence over the years. When he expressed his intention to look for you in Phoenix, to ensure your well-being, Margaret and I felt it appropriate to give him this letter. He strikes me as a man of integrity, Nora, and one who does not easily forget an injustice. You may find, as we did, that there is more to Matthew Keller than first meets the eye." Nora read the letter twice more, trying to understand what the Reverend was hinting at. Why would Maddox, a stranger passing through, take such an interest in her welfare? What had he learned in Wickenburg that prompted him to seek her out in Phoenix? These questions still occupied her mind the following evening as she sat in Mrs. Whitman's parlor, waiting for Maddox to arrive. She had taken extra care with her appearance, wearing her best dress, a modest blue cotton with white trim, and arranging her dark hair in a style that framed her face, which was now almost completely healed save for a faint yellowish mark along her cheekbone. Precisely at 7, Mrs. Whitman showed Maddox into the parlor. He had clearly made an effort, as well his clothes were freshly pressed, his dark hair neatly combed, though nothing could entirely tame its tendency to wave. He looked different without his trail dust and cowboy hat, more polished, but somehow no less authentic. "Miss Davis," he greeted her, remaining standing until she gestured to the chair opposite hers. Mrs. Whitman, after a pointed reminder about her 10 o'clock curfew, withdrew to the kitchen, leaving the parlor door conspicuously ajar. "Mr. Keller," Nora returned, suddenly feeling unaccountably nervous. "Thank you for the letter. It was good to hear from the Holloways. They think highly of you," he said, "as do others in Wickenburg, though many are ashamed they didn't speak up sooner about your situation." Nora looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "It's in the past now." "Is it?" Maddox leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. "Your father seems to believe you'll return eventually. He's been telling people you're just visiting relatives and will be back once you've come to your senses." A chill ran through Nora despite the warm evening. "He's wrong. I won't go back." "I believe you," Maddox said simply. "But I'm concerned he might come looking for you once he realizes you truly intend to stay away." The fear that had begun to recede in recent weeks surged back, making Nora's throat tighten. "Why would you concern yourself with my problems, Mr. Keller? We're hardly more than strangers." Maddox was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her both uncomfortable and strangely exhilarated. "I had a sister once," he finally said, his voice low. "Younger than me by 6 years. Her name was Emily." The past tense sent a pang through Nora's heart. "What happened to her?" "Our father was like yours, quick with his fists when crossed, especially after drinking. Our mother died when Emily was 12, and things got worse after that." His jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek as he continued. "I was 18, working on a ranch in Texas, sending money home when I could. Didn't know how bad things had gotten until I came home for Christmas and saw the bruises." Nora felt tears pricking at her eyes, recognizing the pain in his voice as one she knew intimately. "What did you do?" "Took her away that night. We headed west, thinking to start fresh in California." A shadow crossed his face. "But our father tracked us down in El Paso. There was a fight. Emily got caught in the middle." He didn't need to say more. Nora understood from his expression, from the grief that still lingered in his eyes years later. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Been 10 years now," Maddox said, straightening. "I tell you this not for sympathy, Miss Davis, but so you understand why I couldn't just ride away after seeing what your father had done to you. Why I needed to make sure you truly got away safely." The realization of what he was saying, that he had deliberately sought her out in Phoenix, not by chance but by choice, left Nora momentarily speechless. "When I saw those marks on your arms in Wickenburg," he continued, "I knew what they meant. I'd seen the same on Emily. And when I saw your face at the stage station that day," his hands clenched briefly before relaxing again, "I couldn't fail another young woman the way I failed my sister." "You didn't fail," Nora said firmly. "You tried to save her, and I'm trying to make sure you stay saved," he replied. "Which brings me to the matter I wanted to discuss with you." Nora waited, unsure what to expect. "The ranch I work for, the Flying K north of here, belongs to a man named Samuel King. Good man, fair employer. He's getting on in years now, looking to retire." Been grooming me to take over the operation eventually. Maddox paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. There's a small cabin on the property, separate from the main house. It was the original homestead before King built the bigger place. It's basic but solid. Empty now. Nora furrowed her brow, not following where this was leading. Mr. Keller, if you came to work at the Flying K, he interrupted gently, you'd have that cabin to yourself. King's looking for someone to keep the books, handle correspondence, maybe help his wife with the household. The pay's better than what you're likely making at the store, and you'd be far enough from Phoenix that your father would never think to look for you there, even if he did come searching. The offer was so unexpected that, for a moment, Nora couldn't formulate a response. You're offering me a position at your ranch, at Mr. King's ranch, Maddox corrected. Though hopefully mine someday. And yes, I am. I spoke with him yesterday, and he's agreeable. Said he'd be glad to have an educated young woman help bring some organization to his business affairs. But you hardly know me, Nora protested. How can you be sure I'm qualified? Maddox smiled slightly. Henderson told me you've got the neatest ledgers he's ever seen and a head for figures that puts his own to shame. That's qualification enough for King. Nora's mind raced, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. A position at her ranch, away from town, with better pay and a place of her own. It was more than she could have hoped for. But there was something else behind Maddox's offer, something in the way he looked at her that suggested his interest might not be entirely driven by memories of his sister. Why are you really doing this, Mr. Keller? She asked directly. He held her gaze, unflinching. Because I couldn't save Emily. Because no one should live in fear. Because I saw something in you at that stage station, a courage that reminded me of her. He paused, then added more quietly, and because in the brief moments we've spent together, I've come to admire you, Miss Davis. Your strength. Your dignity despite everything you've endured. His honesty disarmed her. In the world Nora had grown up in, men rarely spoke so plainly, especially to women. It was both unsettling and refreshing. I don't know what to say, she admitted. It's a generous offer, but you don't have to decide tonight, Maddox interjected. Take some time to think it over. I'll be in Phoenix for 3 more days before I head back to the ranch. Nora nodded, grateful for the reprieve. Thank you, I will think about it. They talked for a while longer, Maddox telling her more about the Flying K, its operations, the people who worked there, the surrounding countryside. His obvious love for the place was evident in the way he described the vast open ranges, the mountains on the horizon, the big sky that seemed to go on forever. As their conversation drew to a close, with Mrs. Whitman pointedly checking the clock in the hallway, Maddox rose to take his leave. I'll call again the day after tomorrow if that's agreeable, to hear your decision. Yes, that would be fine, Nora replied, standing as well. At the door he paused, looking down at her with those penetrating gray eyes. Whatever you decide, Miss Davis, I want you to know that you've already done the hardest part. You got away. Everything that comes after is just choosing the shape of your freedom. The words stayed with her long after he'd gone, echoing in her mind as she prepared for bed. The shape of her freedom. Until now, escape had been her only goal, surviving day to day in a new place without her father's shadow. Maddox was offering her something more, not just safety but purpose, not just distance but a true new beginning. She fell asleep with his words still running through her thoughts, and when she woke the next morning, Nora found that her decision had somehow made itself during the night. The rightness of it settled in her chest with a certainty that surprised her. 2 days later, when Maddox returned to the boarding house, Nora was waiting in the parlor with her carpet bag already packed beside her. "You're coming, then?" he asked, though her intentions were clear. "Yes, she replied simply. "I've given Mr. Henderson my notice and settled accounts with Mrs. Whitman." Something like relief, mixed with another emotion Nora couldn't quite identify, crossed Maddox's face. "We'll leave first thing tomorrow if that suits you. It's a full day's ride to the Flying K." "Tomorrow is perfect," Nora agreed. As she climbed onto the wagon seat beside Maddox the following morning, watching the streets of Phoenix recede behind them, Nora felt a strange mixture of apprehension and anticipation. She was placing an enormous amount of trust in this man she barely knew, heading to a remote ranch far from the relative safety of town. But as the miles passed, and the landscape opened up around them, rolling hills giving way to vast stretches of desert broken by stands of saguaro cactus, the distant mountains shimmering in the heat, Nora found her anxiety gradually receding. Maddox was easy company, neither pressing her to talk nor filling the silence with unnecessary chatter. When he did speak, it was to point out landmarks or share stories about the land they passed through, his deep voice carrying easily over the creak of the wagon wheels. By midday, they stopped in the shade of a cottonwood grove beside a small creek for a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and jerky. The water ran cool and clear, a rarity in the Arizona territory, and Nora gratefully splashed some on her face after they'd eaten. "Still about 4 hours to the ranch," Maddox said, consulting the position of the sun. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," Nora assured him, though the hard wagon seat had left her more sore than she cared to admit. "It's beautiful country out here. Gets even better closer to the ranch. More water, more green." He studied her for a moment, then added, "King's a good man, but he can be gruff. Don't take it personally if he seems abrupt at first." "I'm used to difficult men," Nora replied dryly before she could stop herself. To her surprise, Maddox laughed, a rich, genuine sound that transformed his normally serious face. "Fair point. Though King's bark is worse than his bite, and he doesn't bite at all, especially not women or children." "And his wife?" Nora asked, suddenly realizing she knew very little about the people she would be living and working alongside. "Martha's the gentlest soul you'll ever meet. Been married to King for 40 years, and somehow still looks at him like he hung the moon." Maddox's expression softened. "They never had children of their own. I think that's partly why they've taken such an interest in me over the years." As they continued their journey through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changed, becoming less arid as they gained elevation. The road wound through rolling grasslands dotted with juniper and pine, and in the distance, Nora could see the dark line of a proper forest against the mountains. "Most folks don't realize Arizona has places like this," Maddox commented, noticing her surprise at the greenery. "They think it's all desert." "It's nothing like Wickenburg," Nora agreed, drinking in the scenery. "Flying K sits on the edge of the high country. We get snow in winter, wildflowers in spring, good grazing land, plenty of water." Pride colored his voice as he described the ranch. "King chose well when he settled here 30 years ago." The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when they crested a ridge and Maddox pulled the wagon to a halt. "There it is," he said, gesturing to the valley below. Nora's breath caught at the sight. The Flying K spread out before them, a cluster of buildings nestled in a broad valley, surrounded by fenced pastures where cattle grazed. A creek meandered through the property, its course marked by a line of cottonwoods and willows. In the center stood a large, 2-story ranch house built of logs and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Nearby were a barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings, all well maintained. And set slightly apart, perhaps a quarter mile from the main house, was a smaller cabin, the one Maddox had mentioned, Nora presumed. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Home," Maddox replied, the single word carrying a wealth of meaning. He flicked the reins, and the horses began the descent into the valley. As they approached the ranch, Nora saw a figure emerge onto the porch of the main house, a tall, rangy man with a shock of white hair. He raised a hand in greeting as the wagon rolled into the yard. "That's King," Maddox said, returning the wave. "Looks like Martha's got him watching for us." Samuel King proved to be as gruff as Maddox had warned, but his handshake was firm and his pale blue eyes direct as he welcomed Nora to the Flying K. His wife, Martha, emerged from the house moments later, a small, bird-like woman with a crown of silver braids and the warmest smile Nora had ever seen. "You poor dear, you must be exhausted after that long ride," Martha fussed, taking Nora's hands in her own. "Come inside and have some tea while Maddox and Samuel see to your things." The main house was as impressive inside as out, spacious and well-built, with polished wooden floors, sturdy furniture, and touches of refinement that spoke of Martha's influence. Over tea and freshly baked biscuits, Nora found herself relaxing as Martha explained what her duties would entail: keeping the ranch's financial records, handling correspondence with cattle buyers and suppliers, assisting with household accounts. "And of course, you'll have the old homestead cabin to yourself," Martha added. "We've had it cleaned and aired out. It's basic but comfortable. Maddox mentioned you value your independence." Nora shot a grateful glance at Maddox, who had rejoined them after seeing to the wagon and horses. He gave her a slight nod, understanding passing between them. "I do," she confirmed. "And I'm very grateful for the opportunity you're giving me, Mrs. King." "Martha, please," the older woman corrected gently, "and it's us who should be grateful. Samuel's hand has gotten too stiff for much writing, and neither of us has the head for figures we once did. Having someone educated to manage the paperwork will be a blessing." After the tea, Maddox drove Nora the short distance to the cabin that would be her new home. As he described, it was small but solid, a single room with a stone fireplace, a bed, table, chairs, and a small cooking area. Windows on all four sides let in the late afternoon light, and a tiny porch offered a view of the creek and mountains beyond. "It's perfect," Nora said as she stepped inside, taking in the simple, clean space. "Martha's put in some extra touches," Maddox observed, nodding toward a vase of wildflowers on the table, the colorful quilt on the bed, the curtains at the windows. "She's been looking forward to having another woman at the ranch." As he brought in her carpet bag and a box of supplies, Martha had insisted she take food, linens, basic necessities. Nora found herself studying him in the golden light of late afternoon. Away from town, here on the land he clearly loved, Maddox seemed more at ease, more himself somehow. "Thank you," she said when he'd finished, "for everything. For seeing what was happening in Wickenburg, for helping me get away, for bringing me here." Maddox paused at the door, hat in hand, his expression serious. "You don't owe me any thanks, Miss Davis. I did what any decent man should have done." He hesitated, then added, "I'll let you get settled. Breakfast is at sunrise in the main house if you're up to it, or later if you need more rest. No one expects you to start work immediately." After he'd gone, Nora moved to the window, watching as he walked back toward the main ranch buildings, his stride long and confident. She wasn't entirely sure what lay ahead, but for the first time in years, she felt something like hope taking root in her heart. The days at the Flying K quickly settled into a rhythm that Nora found both comforting and liberating. She rose early, breakfasting with the Kings and whatever ranch hands weren't already out working, then spent mornings in the small office off the main house, bringing order to the ranch's neglected books and correspondence. Afternoons might find her helping Martha with household tasks or continuing her office work, depending on what needed attention. The Kings were as kind as Maddox had described Samuel, gruff but fair, Martha warm and motherly without being intrusive. They respected Nora's privacy, seeming to understand instinctively that she had come to the Flying K seeking not just employment, but sanctuary. Maddox himself was often away from the ranch house, overseeing cattle operations, meeting with buyers, or managing the half-dozen cowhands who worked the Flying K's extensive holdings. When their paths did cross at meals, in the evenings when he sometimes stopped by her cabin to check if she needed anything, or on Sundays when work eased enough for everyone to gather for Martha's special dinner, Nora found herself increasingly drawn to his quiet strength and unassuming integrity. 2 weeks after her arrival, Nora was returning to her cabin at dusk when she noticed Maddox sitting on her small porch, whittling a piece of wood. He stood as she approached, tucking the knife into his belt. "Hope you don't mind," he said. Door hinge was squeaking. "Thought I'd fix it while you were finishing up at the house." "Of course I don't mind," Nora replied, oddly touched by the small gesture of consideration. "Thank you." He nodded, stepping aside so she could enter, then followed when she gestured him in. The cabin felt different somehow with him in its smaller, more intimate, yet strangely right. "You're settling in all right?" he asked, standing awkwardly in the center of the room, too large for the small space yet somehow not imposing. "Very well," Nora assured him, lighting the lamp on the table. The golden glow illuminated his features, casting shadows that emphasized the strong line of his jaw, the slight cleft in his chin. "The Kings have been wonderfully welcoming. They like you," Maddox said simply. "Samuel says you've already found money he didn't know the ranch had coming." Nora smiled. Just some outstanding payments from buyers that had been overlooked, nothing extraordinary. Still, he shifted, seeming to debate something internally before continuing. "I'm glad you came, Miss Davis. The ranch is better for having you here." The sincerity in his voice made something flutter in Nora's chest. "I'm grateful for the opportunity," she said softly. "And please, after everything, I think you might call me Nora." A small smile curved his mouth. "Nora, then." "And I'm Matthew to friends and family, though most still call me Maddox." "Matthew," she tried, liking the way it felt on her tongue. More personal than the nickname everyone used, somehow more intimate. "Which do you prefer, from you?" He held her gaze steadily. "Matthew." Something shifted between them in that moment, a subtle change in the air, a new awareness. Nora felt it like a physical touch, warm and unexpected. "I should let you rest," Matthew said after a beat of silence that stretched just long enough to become meaningful. "Early start tomorrow." "Yes," Nora agreed, though part of her wished he would stay longer. "Good night, Matthew." "Good night, Nora," he replied, his voice slightly rougher than before. He hesitated at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read before stepping out into the gathering darkness. After he'd gone, Nora moved to the window, watching his tall figure disappear toward the bunkhouse, silhouetted against the last light in the western sky. The flutter in her chest hadn't subsided. If anything, it had intensified into something warm and insistent that she was almost afraid to name. As autumn deepened toward winter, the work on the Flying K changed with the seasons. Cattle were moved to lower pastures, buildings were prepared for the coming cold, and supplies were laid in. Nora found her duties expanding naturally, not because anyone demanded more of her, but because she saw needs and filled them. She helped Martha preserve the last of the garden's harvest, organized the ranch's financial records into a system that made sense, and began keeping a detailed log of cattle sales that gave Samuel a clearer picture of his operation than he'd ever had before. And through it all, her awareness of Matthew Keller continued to grow. She noticed things about him that she hadn't before: the gentleness in his hands when he worked with horses, the respect he showed to the youngest ranch hand and the oldest alike, the quiet way he assumed responsibility without making a show of it. He wasn't a man who needed to prove himself, Nora realized. He simply was himself, solid as the mountains that rimmed the valley. For his part, Matthew seemed equally aware of her. She would look up from her work to find his eyes on her, quickly averted when she noticed. He found reasons to visit her cabin: a loose shutter that needed fixing, fresh meat from a successful hunt, books borrowed from Samuel's library that he thought she might enjoy. Small gestures, but meaningful ones. It was Martha who finally said something. On a crisp November afternoon, as she and Nora worked together in the main house kitchen, preparing pies for the coming Thanksgiving celebration. "That boy watches you like you're the sunrise after a long, dark night," the older woman observed, her hands never pausing in their skilled work of crimping pie crust. Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." Martha's knowing smile was gentle. "I think you do, dear, and I think you feel something for him too." Unable to deny it, Nora focused intently on the apples she was slicing. "It's complicated. Because of what happened before. With your father." Martha's direct question startled Nora, who looked up sharply. "Oh yes, I know," Martha continued. "Not all the details, but enough. Matthew told us what we needed to know before bringing you here." "I see," Nora said quietly, unsure how to feel about this revelation. "He didn't betray your confidence," Martha hastened to add. "Just said you'd had trouble at home and needed a fresh start somewhere safe. Samuel and I filled in the blanks ourselves, seeing those fading marks when you first arrived." Her kind eyes held no judgment, only compassion. "We've lived long enough to recognize the signs." Nora set down her knife, suddenly overwhelmed. "I didn't want anyone to know." "Of course not, dear." Martha dusted flour from her hands and came around the table to place a gentle arm around Nora's shoulders. "But sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter. And knowing doesn't change how we feel about you, only deepens our admiration for your courage." Tears pricked at Nora's eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She had not cried since leaving Wickenburg, not even on that first night of freedom in Phoenix. "I'm not sure I'm very courageous." "Getting away from harm takes courage," Martha said firmly. "And so does opening your heart again after it's been bruised." She gave Nora's shoulders a gentle squeeze before returning to her pie crust. "Matthew is nothing like your father, you know. He's a good man through and through." "I know," Nora replied softly. And she did know it, had seen it demonstrated in 100 small ways since coming to the Flying K. Matthew's strength was never used to intimidate or control, only to protect and support. His hands, capable of breaking a wild horse or subduing a belligerent drunk, had never been anything but gentle with her. "Just something to think about," Martha said, returning to her work with a small, satisfied smile. The conversation stayed with Nora in the days that followed, surfacing in quiet moments when she caught herself watching Matthew across the dining table or from the window of her cabin as he worked with the horses in the corral. She was attracted to him, had been, she realized, since that day in Wickenburg when he'd faced down her father. But it was more than physical attraction. It was a recognition of something kindred in him, a shared understanding that went beyond words. The first snow of the season came in early December, transforming the Flying K overnight into a wonderland of white. Nora woke to find the world outside her cabin windows blanketed in pristine snow, the familiar landscape rendered new and magical in the early morning light. She had just finished dressing when a knock sounded at her door. Opening it, She found Matthew on her porch, snowflakes catching in his dark hair, his cheeks reddened by the cold. "Morning," he greeted her, his breath visible in the crisp air. "Thought you might want a ride up to the main house. Snow's deeper than it looks." Indeed, looking past him, Nora could see that what had appeared to be a gentle blanket of snow from her window was actually nearly knee-deep in places. "That's very thoughtful. Give me just a moment." She quickly wrapped herself in her warmest shawl, a gift from Martha, and pulled on the lined boots that Samuel had insisted she would need for winter at the ranch. When she stepped outside, Matthew was waiting with a saddled horse. "No wagon?" she asked, eyeing the horse somewhat dubiously. Her experience with riding was limited at best. "Wheels don't do well in this much snow," he explained. "Don't worry, old Dusty here is gentle as they come." Before Nora could formulate a response, Matthew had moved to her side, his hands at her waist. "May I?" he asked softly. At her nod, he lifted her easily onto the saddle, his grip secure but respectful. The casual display of strength sent an unexpected shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. Once she was settled, Matthew took the reins and began leading the horse through the snow toward the main house, breaking a path as they went. The morning was stunning silent save for the crunch of snow beneath his boots and Dusty's hooves, the air crystalline and sharp with cold. "It's beautiful," Nora said, gazing at the transformed landscape. Matthew looked back over his shoulder, smiling up at her. "Wait till you see it when the sun hits the mountains, like nothing else on earth." As if on cue, the sun crested the eastern ridge, sending shafts of golden light across the snow-covered valley. The effect was breathtaking, every surface glittering as though dusted with diamonds, the shadows a rich, vibrant blue against the white. Nora gasped softly at the beauty of it, and Matthew stopped, turning to watch her reaction rather than the sunrise. Something in his expression made her heart skip a tenderness, an appreciation that seemed directed not at the magnificent landscape but at her. "Matthew," she began, not quite sure what she wanted to say but feeling the need to acknowledge the moment somehow. Before she could continue, a shout from the direction of the ranch house broke the spell. One of the hands was waving, calling for Matthew's attention. "Duty calls," he said with a rueful smile. "Let's get you to the house before you freeze." The rest of the day was too busy for private conversation. The snow had brought its own set of challenges to the ranch livestock, needed extra feed and care. Water troughs had to be kept from freezing. And a fallen tree had damaged part of the fence in the north pasture, requiring immediate repair. It was late evening by the time Nora returned to her cabin, accompanied again by Matthew. The snow had stopped, and the night was clear and cold, the sky above them a vast field of stars more brilliant than any Nora had ever seen. "I never knew there were so many," she said, head tilted back to take in the spectacle. Matthew followed her gaze upward. "One of the things I love most about this place. Makes a man feel small, but in a good way." They had reached her cabin door, but neither made a move to end the evening. Standing close beside her in the starlight, Matthew seemed both familiar and mysterious, the man she had come to know and trust over the past months, yet also someone new, someone who stirred feelings in her that were increasingly difficult to ignore. "Nora," he said quietly, his voice low and serious, "there's something I've been wanting to say to you." She turned to face him fully, her heart suddenly racing. "Yes, when I found you in Phoenix, brought you here, I did it because I thought you deserved a chance at a new life free from fear." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I never expected to feel the way I do now." "And how is that?" Nora asked, barely above a whisper. Matthew took a deep breath. "Like I've found something I didn't even know I was looking for." He lifted a hand, hesitating briefly before gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers grazing her cheek. "You've become important to me, Nora. More than important." The touch of his hand, warm against her cold skin, sent a tremor through her. "Matthew, you don't need to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I know you came here for safety, not this, whatever this is. I just wanted you to know where I stand." Nora found herself reaching up, covering his hand with her own, keeping it pressed against her cheek. "I feel it too," she admitted, "this connection between us, but it frightens me." "I would never hurt you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Never, I know that," and she did with a certainty that surprised her. "It's not you I'm afraid of, it's feeling so much, being vulnerable again." Matthew nodded, understanding in his eyes. "We can take it slow as you need." The tenderness in his expression undid her final reservations. Rising on her toes, Nora pressed her lips to his in a kiss that was both question and answer, tentative yet certain. For a moment, Matthew stood perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then his arms came around her, strong and secure, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with a gentleness that made her heart ache. When they finally parted, both somewhat breathless, the world seemed to have shifted on its axis. The stars above, the snow beneath their feet, the quiet night around them all were the same, yet everything had changed. "I should go," Matthew said, though he made no move to release her from his embrace. "It's getting late." "Yes," Nora agreed, equally reluctant to end the moment. "Thank you for walking me home." His smile was warm enough to melt the snow around them. "My pleasure. Sleep well, Nora." "You too, Matthew." As she watched him walk away through the starlit snow, Nora felt a peace settle over her that had nothing to do with the tranquil night and everything to do with the man disappearing into it. For the first time since she could remember, the future seemed not something to fear but something to anticipate, full of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. Their courtship progressed with a natural ease that surprised Nora, who had never imagined that loving someone could feel so uncomplicated, so right. Matthew was patient and considerate, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, his strength a shelter rather than a threat. Christmas at the ranch was a revelation, Martha's decorations transforming the main house into a festive haven, the scent of pine boughs and cinnamon filling the air. Carols sung around the piano that Nora hadn't even known Martha could play. On Christmas Eve, after the celebrations with the Kings and the ranch hands had wound down, Matthew walked Nora back to her cabin through a fresh dusting of snow. "I have something for you," he said when they reached her porch, pulling a small package from his coat pocket. "Wanted to give it to you privately." Nora unwrapped the gift carefully, a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers. "It's lovely," she said, running her fingers over the intricate design. "Open it," Matthew prompted gently. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a silver pendant in the shape of a key, suspended on a delicate chain. The key was old, clearly an antique, with an intricate bow and a bit shaped into what looked like a heart. "It was my mother's," Matthew explained, his voice quiet in the stillness of the night. "The only thing of hers I managed to keep after she passed. The key doesn't open anything anymore. It belonged to her mother's house in Virginia, long gone now. But she always said it was a reminder that home isn't a place, but the people you carry in your heart." Tears pricked at Nora's eyes as she understood the significance of such a gift. "Matthew, I can't take this. It's too precious." He took the necklace from the box, the silver catching the moonlight as it dangled from his fingers. "I want you to have it, because you've become home to me, Nora." He paused, then asked softly, "May I?" At her nod, he moved behind her, carefully placing the chain around her neck and fastening it. The pendant settled against her collarbone, cool at first but quickly warming to her skin. When Matthew's hands came to rest lightly on her shoulders, Nora leaned back against him, savoring the solid strength of his chest at her back. "I love you," he said simply, the words spoken against her hair. "Have for a while now." Nora turned in his arms, looking up into his face so dear to her now, so essential. "I love you too, Matthew. I think perhaps I began to fall in love with you that day in Wickenburg when you stood between me and my father." His arms tightened around her, drawing her closer. "Nora Davis, would you consider becoming Nora Keller?" The question, so plainly asked yet carrying such weight, made her heart skip. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Yes," he replied, a smile touching his lips, "though I had planned a more formal proposal. Wanted to speak with Samuel first, do things properly." "Yes," Nora said, rising on her toes to press a kiss to his mouth. "Yes, I'll marry you, Matthew Keller." The kiss that followed was different from those they had shared before, deeper, more certain, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally parted, Matthew rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "I should go," he said reluctantly, "before I forget my good intentions." Nora laughed softly, understanding. They had been careful to maintain propriety, aware of the king's trust in them and their own desire to begin their life together without regrets. "Soon," she whispered, the word both promise and longing. "Soon," he agreed, pressing one more kiss to her lips before stepping back. "Merry Christmas, Nora." "Merry Christmas, Matthew." As she watched him walk away through the moonlit snow, the key pendant warm against her skin, Nora felt a happiness so complete it was almost painful. The journey from Wickenburg had been long and uncertain, but it had led her here, to this perfect moment, to this man who loved her not in spite of her wounds, but with a full understanding of all she had overcome. They were married in the early spring, when the snow had melted, and the first wildflowers were beginning to dot the meadows around the flying K. The ceremony was small but joyful, held in the garden behind the main house with Reverend Collins from the nearest town officiating. Martha had insisted on making Nora's dress, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk that made Matthew's eyes widen appreciatively when she appeared on Samuel's arm. "He looks at you the way every woman dreams of being looked at," Martha had whispered as they prepared for the ceremony. "Like you're a miracle he still can't quite believe is real." And standing before him as they spoke their vows, Nora understood exactly what Martha meant, because she felt the same way, awed by the gift of this man's love, humbled by the journey that had brought them together. The celebration afterward was lively, with ranch hands and neighbors from miles around joining in the feast that Martha had spent days preparing. There was music and dancing, laughter and tears of joy. Even Samuel, usually so reserved, raised his glass in an emotional toast to the children of my heart, if not my blood. As evening fell and the festivities continued, Matthew drew Nora away from the crowd, leading her to a spot by the creek where they could see the last rays of sunset painting the mountains gold. "Happy?" he asked, his arm secure around her waist. "Perfectly," she replied, leaning into him. "Though I'm beginning to think your patience may have run its course." She glanced up at him teasingly, noting the way his eyes had darkened when they'd found a moment alone. His laugh was low and warm against her ear. "Mrs. Keller, you have no idea." The cabin that had been Nora's sanctuary now became their home, expanded and improved by Matthew's skilled hands over the winter months. A proper bedroom had been added, the main room enlarged, the porch extended to wrap around two sides of the structure. It was still modest compared to the main ranch house, but it was theirs, a place to begin their life together. That night, after the last guests had departed and they had bid good night to the kings, Matthew led Nora across the moonlit meadow to their cabin. At the door, he paused, then swept her into his arms in a smooth motion that made her laugh in surprise. "Tradition," he explained with a grin, carrying her across the threshold. Inside, the cabin was warm and welcoming, lit by the soft glow of oil lamps and a fire already burning in the hearth. Martha's doing, no doubt. Nora had a fleeting moment of nervousness as Matthew set her gently on her feet, but it vanished when she met his eyes and saw nothing but love and patience there. "We have all the time in the world," he said softly, seeming to read her thoughts. "There's no rush," and there wasn't. Their first night as husband and wife was a slow discovery of each other. Matthew's hands and lips gently erasing the memory of every cruel touch Nora had ever endured, replacing fear with desire, pain with pleasure. In his arms, she found a freedom more complete than any she had known before, the freedom to trust completely, to give herself without reservation, to love and be loved with a depth that transformed them both. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the quiet darkness, Matthew's fingers traced idle patterns on the bare skin of her shoulder. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted. "After Emily died, I was so angry for so long, didn't think I deserved happiness." Nora pressed a kiss to his chest just above his heart. "And now," his arms tightened around her, "now I know better. We both deserve this, Nora. Every moment of joy we can find together." "Yes," she agreed, the word both acknowledgement and promise. "We do." The years that followed were good ones for the Flying K and for the Kellers. As Samuel had planned, he gradually handed over management of the ranch to Matthew, who proved to be as skilled a businessman as he was a cattleman. With Nora's help, the ranch's operations expanded, its reputation for quality stock spreading throughout the territory. Their family grew as well. 2 years after their marriage, Nora gave birth to their first child, a son they named Samuel Thomas Keller, after the man who had become like a father to them both. Little Sam was followed 2 years later by Emily Martha, named for the sister Matthew had lost and the woman who had become a mother to Nora. And 3 years after that came James, a happy surprise who completed their family. The children grew strong and healthy in the freedom of the ranch, their days filled with the simple joys of country life, riding with their father, learning to cook with their mother, helping with age-appropriate chores that taught them the value of hard work and the satisfaction of a job well done. They knew, in an age-appropriate way, the story of how their parents had met, how their father had helped their mother escape a difficult situation, how love had grown between them at the Flying K. It was important to both Matthew and Nora that their children understand that strength didn't mean domination, that a man's hands were meant for building and protecting, never for harming those weaker than himself. "Your mother is the bravest person I know," Matthew would tell the children, his eyes meeting Nora's across the dinner table with a look that still made her heart quicken after all their years together. "She taught me what real courage looks like." Nora would blush at such praise, but she no longer denied it. She had come to recognize her own strength, to value the resilience that had allowed her not just to survive but to thrive, to build a life filled with love and purpose. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Matthew surprised Nora with a trip to San Francisco, a journey she had once planned as an escape, but now undertook as a celebration. They left the children in Martha and Samuel's capable hands, the elder Kings now semi-retired but still vital parts of ranch life, and traveled west by train, a luxury that still amazed Nora despite the territory's rapid development. San Francisco was everything Nora had imagined, and more, a vibrant city of hills and fog, cable cars and elegant buildings. the vast expanse of the bay opening to the endless Pacific. They stayed in a fine hotel, dined in restaurants, attended the theater, and walked arm in arm through streets unlike any Nora had ever known. "You ever wish we lived somewhere like this?" Matthew asked as they stood on a hill overlooking the city, the wind from the bay tugging at Nora's skirts and loosening tendrils of hair from her careful arrangement. "Somewhere with more. Everything." Nora considered the question seriously, gazing out at the bustling metropolis below them. Once, perhaps, she might have been dazzled by such a place, seen it as the ultimate freedom from her confined existence in Wickenburg. But now she knew better. "No," she said honestly, turning to face her husband. "I love visiting, but the Flying K is home. It's where we've built our life, where our children are growing up safe and loved." She reached up to touch his face, the familiar contours as dear to her now as they had been the day she married him. "It's where I found you." Matthew's smile was slow and sweet, the same smile that still made her breath catch after a decade of marriage. "That's what I hoped you'd say," he admitted, drawing her into his arms. "Because I couldn't imagine raising our children anywhere but under that big Arizona sky." "Neither could I," Nora agreed, rising on her toes to kiss him, not caring who might see their display of affection. 10 years, and still the touch of his lips on hers sent the same thrill through her body, the same surge of gratitude through her heart. Their return to the Flying K was joyful, the children rushing to meet them as the wagon rolled into the yard, little Sam, not so little anymore at 8, proudly recounting how he'd helped with the cattle. Emily at 6 already showing the intelligence and determination that would mark her adult years. And 3-year-old James simply demanding to be swept up into his father's strong arms. That night, after the children were asleep and Nora and Matthew sat on their porch watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky, Nora found herself reflecting on the strange, winding path that had led her to this moment. "I was thinking about my father today," she admitted, her hand finding Matthew's in the darkness, wondering what became of him. Matthew's fingers tightened around hers. "Do you want to know? I could find out if you really want to." Nora considered the question, searching her heart for the answer. "No," she said finally. "I don't think I do. Whatever happened to him, it's part of a life I left behind." This, she gestured with her free hand to encompass their home, the sleeping children inside, the ranch spread out before them in the moonlight. "This is what matters now." "You're an extraordinary woman, Nora Keller," Matthew said, bringing her hand to his lips. "And I thank God every day that I was in Wickenburg that morning, that I saw you, that something made me stop and notice what others had ignored for too long." Nora leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her like a gentle tide. "I used to wonder why no one ever helped before, why it took a stranger passing through to see what was happening. But now I think perhaps it had to be you, that we were meant to find each other exactly when we did." "Fate?" Matthew asked, a smile in his voice. "Or Providence?" Nora replied. "Either way, I'm grateful." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft whicker of horses in the barn, the whisper of wind through the pines. It was a good life they had built together, one founded on mutual respect and deepening love, one that had healed old wounds and created new joys. "What are you thinking now?" Matthew asked, his voice low in the darkness. Nora smiled, turning to press a kiss to his shoulder. "That I'm exactly where I'm meant to be, that every step of the journey was worth it because it led me here, to this ranch, to our children." She lifted her face to his, finding his lips unerringly even in the dim light of the porch. "To you." And as Matthew gathered her close, his kiss a promise renewed with each passing year, Nora knew with absolute certainty that the frightened young woman who had fled Wickenburg all those years ago could never have imagined the fullness of the life that awaited her, a life not defined by escape, but by love, not by fear, but by freedom. It had begun with bruises seen and acknowledged, with one man's refusal to look away from another's cruelty. But it had become so much more a journey of healing, of discovery, of building something strong and true from the broken pieces of the past. And in the end, that was the greatest freedom of all,